Hey, what's up, everybody? I have my friend Shane here because he agreed to discuss the Kalam cosmological argument with me. Isn't that right?
Partially, I'm going to use a certain aspect or thing that I think leads to the kalam, or I think it stems from the kalam in partiality, but it'll be similar. So yes, to a certain degree, we'll have that conversation
Okay, all right, yeah, that's cool. That's cool because
and any other conversation that comes about, if that's cool too. Whatever just kind of happens, we'll go with.
yeah. So I guess like I should just hear where you're going in terms of like the Kalam because at least like I don't get that like in the slightest as you would imagine. So why does it make
Mhm.
sense to you?
So there's the kalam to me makes sense because it seems like an offshoot of something else that makes sense, and so I'll do the premises of the kalam first, and then I'll show you the thing that it makes sense of what it stems from. So the kalam is premise one: whatever begins to exist is a cause of its existence. Premise two: the universe began to exist, and therefore premise three: the universe has a cause to its existence. First of all, it makes sense because I love how this specifies the first aspect, which is whatever begins to exist has a cause of existence. Um, uh, like God himself, like we're talking about the creator or whatever shape or form of that thing, the necessary being that moves or causes the universe to exist, itself exists but doesn't begin to exist. So I think it's a cool thing. The thing that I don't know if it directly stems from this, but Aquinas,
Mhm.
he was a philosopher, as you probably know about. Aquinas makes this argument called the argument from cause, and it's very, very similar, and it's what I typically like to use.
Mhm.
Let me see if I can get the specifics for you. I want to get the premise. Sorry, I'll look it up on my computer. Um, oh, why can I not find? Is this? Yeah, sure, I can use this one. This is not the picture I usually use. The argument of efficient cause. No, that's the order. Sorry, I should have had all my tools ready, but I did not. uh, there's the argument from motion. The most there's the argument from motion, but I want the argument from cause specifically. So give me one sec to see if I can. I think this is actually an Aristotelian or Aristotle argument. Are you familiar with the Aristotelian? The
Maybe because I made a video about the Kalam against like the against mereological nihilism, and I imagine, yeah, I don't know, I
I'm assuming we're
remember
gonna probably get into a
someone.
little bit of that today. I assume we're gonna get into like a battle of the schools of mereological nihilism and Aristotelian metaphysics.
Yeah, what
Um,
exactly does that like entail? Because like I remember a comment like briefly like objecting to my video, like mentioning supposed like Aristotle sort of shit. So like, what would that be?
so the I don't know enough about it, and I'm assuming we could probably look it up and get something out of it. But from my understanding, uh, Aristotelian metaphysics is this understanding of the universe about nature, beings, essences, and stuff like that.
Wait, determining what?
Um, Nature's, beings, essences, persons, these distinctions that are like, I guess I'm trying to think of how to word it. Um, uh, yeah, like I'm blanking on the best way to explain it because I'm still so new to a lot of this stuff as well. So audience, bear with me. If I don't know something, I'm gonna be so real about how I don't know something. Um, Let me see if I can look up a good definition of that. I found the argument too that I looked up. What do you? So you don't know anything of Aristotelian metaphysics, do you?
Um, well, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I just kind of need like a quick like thing
Yeah.
here.
Let's see if I can find. I just saw a really cool definition of it. Let me go back. Is whether it be the study of being or better or beings of things that can be said to be that studies them in particular ways as beings. So like pretty much a study of beings. It's
When you say beings, like
beings in a
like
philosophical
what?
context of what something is, and a
Yeah.
metaphysical context of like the awareness of the mind, I would say typically. So like I would say, and you might disagree with this, do you think that the mind and the brain are distinct of each other, meaning one can be contingent upon the other but they're distinct in aspects?
Um.
Or would you
Wait.
disagree?
Let me see if I understand this correctly. Like you're asking me if like the mind and the brain are contingent upon each other, but there's a difference between them.
Right, so I'd say the mind is contingent upon the brain, meaning it cannot exist without the brain.
Mhm.
However, comma, and I say however comma a lot. Your fans are gonna hate me for that. But yeah, when I say however comma, I mean that they are not one and the same. So like a
Okay, okay.
neuroscientist, a person who like holds the strict neuroscience,
Mhm.
they would argue that they are. I would say metaphysically they're simply not. The mind itself is a metaphysical thing, not a physical thing. It's a response or reaction to the physical stimuli that occurs within the brain.
Okay, well, I guess then I'm curious how, like, further you distinguish that because, like, if you're saying that they're dependent upon each other, but then they're different, at least, like, on the surface, can you see how that
Mm.
might sound contradictory to me? So, like, maybe you would have to, like, expand a bit more in terms of like,
Um
what why these things are
yeah,
together
so
but
like
not.
think of like the best way I can think about it is like if we're talking about like a brain, probably like uh a maybe not a yeah, like a brain dead person. But let's say there is still activity or something going on within the brain. But this person isn't able to conjure up a memory, right? The memory itself, the image of that memory would exist, what I would say, within the mind. Whereas, like in the brain, it's just electronic stimuli or electric stimuli. You know what I mean? The currents and stuff going through our the physical elements of the brain. And so, like this person wouldn't be able to do that. So, like their mind itself probably wouldn't be persisting as strongly within that person.
Sure, sure. But I guess like then I would ask is like I guess we could think of it as like maybe like people in comas, for example, or like when you say brain dead, like somewhere like similar along those lines. Then
I
I
think a
guess like
coma person would still have the mind working because I think like I don't know exactly what coma people see, but I have heard people who've been in like very long comas and it's like they just experience one
yeah,
long
yeah,
dream.
yeah,
And if they're
so
the
here's like
dream itself,
similar.
that's what I'd say. The dream exists within the mind. It
Mhm.
exists within the psyche of the mind. It does not exist within like if I open up a person's head and look in their brain, I will never be able to see the exact images that's going on.
But
Now, if I put something on their head and I share it to a screen or whatever, I might be able to pull it up. But I'm using the electrical currents and stuff like that to
mhm.
conjure up the image, not that these electrical things themselves are the image. So the image itself exists within the mind.
Yeah, but I guess like I want to ask though then is because like if you're saying that there's a separation between the medical metaphysical aspect of the mind, like I guess then I would ask like where does that exist purely? Because I guess like it would help me understand better because yeah, because like kind of like what you're saying, if you open up
Yeah.
somebody's head, you'll never see their memories, quote unquote. So I guess like this
Where
you
is
would be
like
talking
hard
about
though, because
a
I don't.
soul, I guess is like what you would place it as.
Yeah, I would
And,
say
like,
yeah, yeah. So the mind itself exists. So like the metaphysical of the person would be the soul. The soul itself is like where the mind resides, is what I would say. Um, so all that is like that's why it's metaphysical. It's not a physical place of where it resides. The mind or the intellect resides within the soul. This is like when Christians talk about the idea of God being spirit. I use God for a lot of these now just because it kind of helps. Um, God still holds an intellect or a mind, right? But God is spirit. But God doesn't have a brain, right? He's a metaphysical being. So uh, that would be the idea. Yeah, it's a metaphysical location, not a physical one. Um, but
okay,
we'll get there throughout the conversation. Let me just give you. I brought up the argument for cause, and I want to.
all right.
So I brought up the yeah. So this is the argument from the argument from the nature of efficient cause. Goes premise one: there's an order of efficient causes in the world. Premise two: a thing cannot be the efficient cause of itself, since it cannot be prior to itself. Premise three: there must be a first cause. Premise four: so the efficient cause cannot go on infinitely. Premise five: without the cause, there is no effect. Premise six: if P4 is false, there is no efficient cause since there is no first efficient cause. Premise 7, therefore there must be a first efficient cause. Premise 8, God is the first efficient cause. Conclusion, God exists. Um, the other arguments will specify the idea that uh it'll like make the distinction like there either is an infinite change or chains of things or
Mhm.
there isn't, and the issue that comes with that is without a first cause there is no subsequent like effective. You can't have the infinite chain if there is no first cause, and that would be an oxymoron within it of itself.
Wait,
The
wait.
infinite chain having a first cause wouldn't be an infinite no longer.
Okay, yeah, yeah, no, I agree with that, but I guess then I would ask, I'm curious how something would initially have its like, I guess like first cause in terms of like it being made of itself. Is that what you're saying? Like the first cause is like because like it has no beginning,
The
quote
first
unquote.
cause itself, yeah, would not have beginning, so it's self-sustaining in some way, shape, or form, but it is not a cause of itself. Cause would mean that it has a beginning point, and since it's not prior, yeah. So like
So
God, we would say, doesn't have a beginning. He's just always continuously, eternally self-sustaining.
so I guess like I'm curious about that. Why is it that
Mhm.
God can be self-sustaining, but hypothetically not the universe itself? Because I guess like yeah, it's the whole like I guess God versus like naturalistic thing. Because
Mhm.
if you can apply that standard to God, then I guess like for you it's like why not just the world itself? Well, why is it only
My
possible
only
with God?
contention is I think when we talk about um my biggest contention is just going to be the Big Bang. If we talk about the Big Bang or some beginning point to the universe, even if we agree that matter or something existed before that point,
Hmm.
my hesitancy then becomes uh, we know the rules and laws of our universe based on the contingency point of that universe existing. If something curated or existed before the universe, such as those matter, like let's say matter existed before the Big Bang happened,
Hmm.
we would never know if they apply to the same amount of uh, physics that we do. And so right now we would say, well, matter can never be created or destroyed, energy can never
Hmm.
be created or destroyed. Well, if we would say that before the Big Bang, we really cannot tell. I don't know if it's logically consistent to assume the same things about those aspects naturalistically.
Hmm.
Um, it's like I don't know if the physics are the same. We're making giant leaps there. Whereas we know if the logic is consistent, at least with God or with
Hmm.
some outside necessary being, forgetting if it's God or not, just some necessary being. Um, uh, that
Oh,
necessary
okay,
being
yeah.
therefore can logically consistently be self-sustaining, whereas matter and energy necessarily cannot be. It just cannot be created or destroyed. If it
Mhm.
cannot be created or destroyed and it exists in a space where it can be created or destroyed, we're playing guessing games, and I think its logic is much stronger than the guessing games. Was that a lot? Sorry, that was.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Because I think, like, yeah, I think, like, this is the good bit exactly where I think, like, the mereological and nihilistic aspect of it, like, gets interesting to me because when you say that God is necessary as a self-sustaining being to like create everything, to me it sounds like you're saying that this self-sustaining being is responsible for everything else that like you deem a cause, which doesn't really make sense to me. Well, I might not be like
Why
paraphrasing this
not?
back like correctly because I would say at least is that like if you're saying that the universe itself couldn't have existed without God, that's a self-sustaining being, then I would argue that why wouldn't the universe be something that's like part of God? Which I know that I'm technically arguing from like a mereological, like nihilistic aspect, but at least kind of like what I'm saying in terms of like if we're gonna at least look at the consistent logic, quote unquote, I think you can argue then with or without God that the universe could have existed by itself without like no particular reason. It doesn't require a necessary cause because if you yourself admit that God is a self-sustaining being and the universe comes from God, to me it sounds like the universe couldn't have existed without this self-sustaining being, which is God. So I don't really see a separation, if that makes sense, or at least like if you were to like
I think
expand
the
more, like
distinction is like, yeah, even if the universe is necessary to be predicated upon this thing,
mm,
necessary doesn't I was gonna say necessary doesn't necessarily. Necessary doesn't mean as in like
mm,
um the other being is also dependent on it, which is where I'm like weird with what you're saying right now. Because like if I build a computer, it is necessary for me to exist for that computer to have been built. That doesn't mean the computer is now a part of me. In the same
well,
context, the reason I'm distinguishing the universe from God is because the understanding of God I'm arguing for is a metaphysical necessary being.
mhm.
It's not a physical nature. And so then the universe
Yeah,
itself
but
existing
that's
of a
where
physical nature would be a distinction.
but that's where I'm getting confused because like if you're talking about God as a metaphysical thing, to me it sounds like you're saying that the reason why physical things exist is because of something metaphysical. So how are those contradicting things? I guess like linking together because like I think if I
What
can
do you
try
mean
to like
contradictory? What do you mean like how are those? I'm confused.
oh you're confused about what?
Don't you think that the metaphysical, right?
Mm,
Which isn't bound to our laws or logic of this is another thing I'd say. Since God is outside of our universe, or whatever this necessary being is outside of our universe, he's
mhm,
not bound to the means or properties of the universe, which is
true.
logically consistent, right? Like his physical limitations or limitations in any way, shape, or form differ from ours, um, or the limitations of the universe. So he could just curate a physical thing. Why would that be? Well, that's what's confusing me with what you're saying. It seems like you're saying how can this metaphysical thing curate the physical thing, and then the physical thing not be a part of the metaphysical thing, which is what's confusing me.
Oh, I think like no, that's not necessarily what I'm saying, but I'm trying to understand how I guess like a metaphysical thing such as God is able to create something I guess contradictory like to his nature, because to me I think it is simplistic as saying that like even if you want to call God like metaphysical or not, you're saying that the physical universe is dependent upon something that is, well, at least this is what it sounds like to me, something like metaphysical, while at the same time you're also saying that there is like a distinguishing thing though. So I'm trying to understand how a metaphysical thing, which you said is not bound by like the same like rules, quote unquote,
Yeah.
how
Um.
is it that they can stick together if God's nature is contradictory to the thing that like he's creating? Because to me it sounds no different than saying I can't breathe fire like a dragon, I guess. Like I'm trying to think of like a good analogy, because like
Yeah.
it's like it's like it's like if I were to say that like okay, the rules don't apply to what I'm doing, but I can do it because the rules don't apply to me, and I feel like you can just fill in the blank with anything like that. So I don't really see how it connects together, I guess. Maybe I'm not explaining it properly, but
Um. No, I think I'm kind of getting what you're saying. Tell me if this answers your question in some regard. When I say God is not bound by the rules of the nature of the universe, it's not a scapegoat to say like, see that this is just like he can do whatever he wants because he's not bound to that. I more mean in the concept of like his nature is distinct from the nature of the universe, um,
okay.
and that distinction is what, which I guess I'm just kind of reiterating. But what I mean by that is, uh, that just as the nature has fixated laws
Mhm.
or fixated laws and ordinances of behaviors and stuff like that, this metaphysical being does as well.
Okay.
Um, but it is it being outside at that limitation
Well,
of
yeah.
like,
So you're saying that like I guess like if I'm not to like misrepresent, but I guess like so
mhm.
you're saying that the metaphysical can interact with the physical, but the physical cannot interact with the metaphysical, which I think like is still ultimately the thing that's
um,
confusing me, because if the metaphysical can create the physical, but the physical has no interaction with the
what do
metaphysical
you mean
under
by
the
the
same rules, then how are they
what do
connected
you mean the
whatsoever?
physical? Yeah, what do you mean the physical can't interact with the? Because I think we can. Of course,
Not
I would say I
not
think
to
we
the
can engage with God.
yeah, but like not to like the greatest extent. So I guess like what I'm trying to understand though is that like how I guess how much of this metaphysicality is connected to our physical, yet it's entirely not, or maybe I'm just
Yeah, I would say
jumbling
it's
something.
the cause for the physicality. So in that there's that relation. But think about like
Well, okay, I have
think
a
of this
question.
is okay. Go ahead. Let me hear.
I guess okay, then I would wonder, because like to me it sounds like if there's a metaphysical and a physical, they kind of work as like a duality to each other despite this like weird gap. But it's like I guess then I would wonder, how does the metaphysical on its own exist? Because at least like in comparison to these two ideas, if we're saying that like they're all connected to each other, it sounds to me like you're saying that like the metaphysical was always present. The physical is only something
Yeah.
that was allowed by
So
the
this is what I say.
metaphysical.
Yeah, God would be if the universe itself is the origin of space, time, and matter, right? Time itself, like you couldn't necessarily ask when does God begin to exist or when is God, because if
Mhm.
this metaphysical thing is outside of that, means there is no when. If time is just a measurement of like the
Yeah,
universe
see,
and its
yeah, but
existence.
that's the problem I have though, because I think the moment, or at least like maybe you understand it differently, but like I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say, but I think like the moment you talk about the metaphysical making the physical possible, because physical reality deals by like a cause and effect basis, it inevitably connects back to the metaphysical. So arguably, I think you actually can ask the question when or how long was God supposedly infinite on his own, which wouldn't make sense, because now that the physical is here, it arguably puts an understanding, because we exist in physical reality, that like there was a point in time where God was just his own thing. So I can't
Right,
comprehend
but
how
you
he
would just
could have
go
just been
back.
infinite.
You would just go back infinitely, and that would just argue for his infinite and his eternalness, right? Like if I say, here's the point where the universe begins. Okay, so from here to before here, how long has God been around?
Mhm.
The answer would just be infinitely, which would just get you back to eternal because there would be no there would be no like. You could argue the point of being of when the universe comes to creation. And this is what I would say is like I don't really know how to respond to this one. A critique of Christianity I've heard before is, did God always hold the title of creator before he ever created? Because if he becomes a creator, that implies change, and change implies time.
Yeah.
And so like that's a fair critique that I'm not really sure how to resolve. But outside of that critique, if we're just arguing the idea of God's relation to the physical,
Hmm.
when God created the world, for that, yeah, you would just go on infinitely and eternally. There is no beginning there because the beginning is what we're arguing from backwards.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to have a hard time configuring out how like there's a separation of time within God because like okay, then realistically is the universe gonna go on like forever? Or but you wouldn't think so. Is God gonna like
Well,
destroy the
you
universe at one
no,
point?
that depends. If I'm honest, that depends on the Christian you talk to. Me personally,
Yeah.
in my own eschatology and theology, which
Uh-huh.
differs from other people in my camp, yeah, I think the universe will exist forever. I know that's really weird or hard to comprehend,
Mhm.
but I have this theology. I think the goal of the Bible is for God to reunite heaven and earth.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think the point there is that when Jesus comes back, he will be establishing his kingdom here on earth, establishing the new heaven, new earth, the new Jerusalem, as some call it. And the point then will be a physical, a merging of the physical and metaphysical, spiritual, in some concept
Oh, okay. Well,
that'll
actually, now
reign forever eternally.
I'm
But
curious.
some Christians would disagree. So
I'm curious about one thing. Like, so then
what's
in
that?
a meta way, can we be
Mhm.
considered metaphysical in God's mind then? Because, like, okay, if I
Our
understand,
souls are, yeah. Wait, you have a metaphysical aspect to yourself fully. When you die, like your physical will remain, but your metaphysical is still something that like existing. I think like when we talk about what'll go to heaven or what'll go to hell, that is a
Mhm.
metaphysical aspect. Your mind, your person, who you
Right.
are, all that. Yeah, you are. This is how I would say a big aspect of how you're in relation through God. When Christians say the words like conviction of the Holy Spirit, that is a
Mhm.
metaphysical relationship you have with God,
Mhm.
a spiritual one almost entirely.
Well, I guess okay, like I guess then like I think one thing I would need you to like help me out here is like I guess like erase the duality in my mind about the whole like God and him creating the universe because I think that like we've spoken a lot about how like God exists as like a metaphysical thing and kind of like how you said that like a fair critique of like Christianity is that like did God always have
The
like the
creator time
yeah.
thing, yeah.
And when I think about like yeah, because like even you said I think at the beginning or somewhere close to the beginning that like God like has his like own mind. So like if God was essentially just the only like metaphysical being, well like I guess like the thing I would ask is like how can he be metaphysical? Because the way that we understand metaphysical stuff is that like it doesn't follow the same like regular rules of like physicality. So if
Um,
at one point God didn't like the universe didn't exist and there was no physicality and in God's mind, since you would say that like he's the creator, wouldn't we be his metaphysical creation as paradoxical as that might sound? I don't know.
what do you mean?
Like because
Like it seems like, are you wait, let me rephrase, let me see if I can recall. Are you asking are you asking one, did we always exist metaphysically? Or are you asking in part that our
well no, I mean because like you know how you said earlier that like if
yeah.
you like break open a person's brain you won't be able to like see like their memories quote unquote and like stuff like that.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
we didn't exist before God created us, then did we exist in his mind metaphysically for him to do it?
Yeah, no, I would say no. Um Maybe in thought because he's all knowing and knowing of the world that's gonna pass, sure. But we don't exist in a literal metaphysical sense. Like our souls are not contained within the aspect of God. Um, our souls themselves are uh, uh, like I said, because God has always only existed as metaphysical. Um, he therefore doesn't hold the physicality. And what I say by that is this, right? We are made up of some form of matter, right? Atoms and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Uh, God exists before that. So space, like I said, space, matter, and time all come into existence at one point in time, or at
Mhm.
one point in history. Um, and so if God is before that matter, he cannot be physical, clearly. Um, and so thoughts themselves are necessarily metaphysical, right? A thought is a metaphysical thing. It's not you don't hold a thought, you know. Um, so
Well,
did we
see, I
exist
think
as thoughts? Sure, because he's all knowing. But did we exist as? And I don't want to say God had thoughts like he's thinking about what he's gonna do. I mean, as in he's always known what he will actualize because he's all knowing. He didn't. There was no time where he thought and then acted. There was a knowing of the ordinance of what's gonna happen.
well, I guess like I am curious just how like metaphysical like thoughts are them because at least like wouldn't you say that our thoughts talk about like physical stuff like even like for example even with like art it's like dependent upon things that like we create or symbolize like in the actual like material
Yeah,
world
but those
so
are just the material aspects of them, right? So if I
Mhm.
think about a plane and then I go build a plane, the thought about the plane is still not the plane.
Yeah, but
And my
I'm
thought about the
one
plane is physical. It's just a thought about it.
but I'm like but like would we have these thoughts if it weren't for the material things that we could do and then label with such thoughts I guess is like the thing that I'm I guess
Um,
like questioning here because like to me it sounds like you're saying that like our thoughts alone are like purely metaphysical. And sure, maybe I don't necessarily agree with that, but at least like from a more like skeptic, obviously like less religious
sure,
point
but
of
yeah,
view.
even if I said that like they're contingent upon physical things, right? Like let's say I
Mhm,
go lay down and I start thinking about my phone because I'm away from my phone. My thought
mhm,
about my phone is contingent upon a physical thing because a phone is a physical thing.
mhm.
However, the thought itself is still remains metaphysical, which is the ultimate point. Um, if I am thinking about something and then I paint that thing I'm thinking about, I've just turned a metaphysical thought into a real thing, even if what was existing in that thought was real things, right? If I paint as Bob Ross would say, like a happy little tree or a bush or something like that, yeah, I may be thinking about a physical beauty, but the thought itself still remains metaphysical. Being contingent upon something doesn't make you that thing.
Well, but like I'm curious how that like entirely works though, because like for example, if you go into nature, I imagine like scientifically, it gives the happy chemicals and all that shit, right? Like when people enjoy
Right, but
like
it
like
doesn't.
yeah, but I
The
think but
point.
I'm trying to say that like don't you hold those thoughts because you understand, for example, that you've experienced like sensory and like the physicality of like being in nature. So I think like
Sure, in
yeah,
some aspect, but it doesn't necessarily change the nature of the thought itself. Just because
well,
it's once again that would still be my. If I take a picture of you, right? Is the picture now you, or is it just a physical representation of yourself? Right?
mhm,
That would be my whole thing. Is like, yeah, I may look at the picture and receive some stimuli, just as I would if I were engaging with you on like a personal, in-person level.
mhm.
But that still isn't you. It's a physical
Well,
aspect of or a
I'd
physical
be
thing that represents you, but it's not you.
yeah, but like I'd be curious in terms of like how we have thoughts about things without being able to experience the things that we're having thoughts about. So I think like sure, it can be metaphysical in the sense that like as long as we're away from it, we can recall it. And like I'm aware that like our brains can spin the narrative because we're not constantly experiencing a thing or a memory that like we might always have. But it's like I guess I don't entirely know how to accept that thoughts are just metaphysical because I think everything is very materialistic. Or at least like I don't know if
Do
you
you
know
think
understand what
fantasy?
it was
Wait,
like.
wait. Do you think fantasy is material?
Um like what
Because
what
I would say like just a fantasy, right? Like so before I had ever stepped on a stage, right? So I make music, as you know. Before
Mhm.
I ever stepped on a stage, I would fantasize about the stimuli I would receive from being on stage. Um, but I had never done it before, so I couldn't have done it in correlation to anything. It's just an assumption of the mind. It's a metaphysical thought assumption. It has no basis in true reality because it's a reality that has
Well,
nowhere near come manifest.
I mean, you knew it was possible though, right? Because like you saw like other musicians and like stuff like this. So like, isn't it like you couldn't have imagined yourself in that position unless you know this is an actual materialistic experience that people can go through?
Yeah, but I more mean the stimuli that rushes from the experience, right? Like an artist can make a thing where they like tell me, "Oh yeah, I got off stage and it was such a great time up there" and stuff like that. But so does every football player after a game. It's the stuff they just say to the media that we can typically write off. But like the assumption I build off of any of that is really still fantasy.
Well,
It's
I
not
guess
particular or real. It's not material. It's just an assumption.
well, I guess I would be
Plausibility, wait,
curious.
plausibility of the material and the actualization of the material would still be distinct.
Well, I guess like I'm curious because like would how you think about being on stage hypothetically really be that different from someone else who might have thought the same thing?
Would it be different from that person? Like if they had the same similar experience of the stimuli reaction, no. But the distinction would still be if I had never been up there. that fantasy is still not grounded within material. It's grounded within a material as it's contingent upon material things such as other people, stage, music, and stuff like
Oh,
that.
okay. I
But
think I know a better way to
but
say it.
outside of that, the fantasy itself is like a metaphysical assumption. It's the stimuli I receive from it is solely based off this thought or fantasy of the thought of what could be without actually knowing. And possibility doesn't possibility doesn't negate or doesn't equate to confidence or sureness, right?
Yeah,
Like I
yeah,
can
but
be,
I was
it's possible that the world is actually 6,000 years old and some young Earth creationist cringy weirdo got it right, but it's extremely implausible, right? It's possible that before I had ever stepped on a or possible before I ever stepped on a stage that I could have gotten the assessment right of what it was going to be like, but that didn't make it really plausible. The feeling I probably had before I got on the stage and after I got on the stage may have been different in some way, shape, or form. And so that first fantasy, therefore, cannot be material, even if it's contingent upon it.
See, yeah, I guess, like, yeah, like, I'm still having a hard time buying that because I think, like, yeah, like you're saying it's different, even though it's contingent upon something physical. But at least, like, I would just say, I think, yeah, like a better way to explain it is like, at least, like, then, yeah, it would be an assumption, yeah, not something that like you really know. But it's like, I guess I don't necessarily I guess know how to process that like it is purely metaphysical because at least like I understand the connotations in which that like we're using the word metaphysical where it's like it transcends, let's say, like physical reality. But then again, at the same time, this is why I said I think I can explain it in like a better way. Wouldn't you agree that like if you can assume anything you want, you will play it as if it has value, whether or not it may or may not actually have value because you haven't done it?
Hold on one sec. I'm sorry. I'm texting somebody. Say that last part just to get the question you asked me. I apologize.
Oh, I said that like as long as you can make the assumption that something will be enjoyable, you will play the part regardless of whether it actually is or isn't enjoyable physically. So it's like I understand that we're using metaphysical or like metaphysics in the sense of like a transcendence or like higher than physical reality sort of thing, but I'm trying to argue that like of course if you
Higher
always
might
have
be weird. I
assumptions.
would just say distinct. Higher might be weird terminology. I would just say distinct.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
distinct. But it's like like you know what I'm saying though, right? It's like if you make that assumption, you will play the part regardless of whether it makes sense or not.
um, yeah, I don't know. That's something I'd have to think about.
I mean, yeah, it doesn't necessarily like discredit the metaphysical aspect, but at least like you can see why I might still raise an eyebrow, right? Because like
Partially, I don't know. To me, this is just clicking, and I'm wondering, like maybe I have to give a grander fantasy that is not contingent within the physical to get you to
heaven.
see where I'm
Oh,
talking about. Yeah, like heaven. Heaven itself wouldn't be a physical. Well, I don't. That's a different discussion. But heaven itself, let's just go off the pre-assumption that heaven itself is not a physical place, right? And I fantasize about something that lacks material.
okay, yeah,
What?
but not
What
in a not
then?
in an offensive way, but at least like what would you say then? Because at least like I would imagine you would understand from like my like non-religious point of view. I would just think you're compensating. I guess like idealizing, like because like if you don't have to be specific
Yeah,
about
but
what you're
wait, that
talking about.
idealization is the important part of what I'm trying to get across to you, and I think you agree to it, and I just want to make sure we get there. Whether it is idealization or whatever, whether we talk about the idea of somebody struggling within their psyche or not, I more mean the idea of um this itself must be metaphysical and separate and devoid of material. Because
Okay,
if it
okay.
is devoid of
I
material, if
I
we
have a
agree to that concept, then we would agree to the idea. We can get to the idea that, hey, there could be a metaphysical necessary being outside the bounds of the universe that curates something which is the universe.
yeah,
Until we get to
but
that point, that's where we're really like at a standstill.
but I think like okay, I think like I can like, explain this like in a better way because like we can still get things wrong about the physical world, wouldn't you agree? Like let's say like a physicist or somebody that tries to I guess like conduct some sort of like experiment and it's like I don't like in a simplistic like example, like oh my gosh, we're at a science fair. I'm trying to make this like laser thing, and then like it just blows up, and like I wasn't like expecting that. So I would simply argue and extrapolate from that that like if we can get things wrong about the physical world, why would our minds be any different. So then I would simply just say, just because there are things in our mind that we can't necessarily explain, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a direct correlation to things higher than physical reality. Does that make sense? At least from like a skeptic point of view.
Um, yeah, hmm. What do you think about the argument of, or what do you think about the distinction between rationalism and empiricism? I'm curious
Um,
if you're aware of it.
well, I know empiricism is like things that are empirical, like empirical data and like things like that. Or like when you say like rationalism against empiricism, what do you mean by that?
So rationalism, and there's different forms of it that some I like, some I have problems with. Basically, in the most basic way, rationalism is the theory that based on the claims of the reason, or no, that's sorry, I'm looking at weird definitions. I want to, yeah. So here's a better definition. So empiricism, I'll give you like 4 points of each. I just found a picture of it online. I may not agree with everything, but you'll see where I'm trying to come from. Empiricism is knowledge based on experience and experimentation. Experimental science is a paradigm of knowledge. Experience and experiment rarely, if ever, produce certainty, and some empiricists believe that mathematics can be certain. That's empiricism. Rationalism, on the other hand, would be something like knowledge is based on the use of reason and logic. Mathematics is the paradigm of knowledge. Genuine knowledge is certain. Relation to experience means experience does not produce certainty and does not conform to reason. Thus, experience is best as second-class knowledge. And I think you and I would both agree with
Oh,
that. And so this is the point of what I'm trying to get to, is you're like, well, if we could be wrong about the physical, that's more of an empiricism idea, right? Empirically, we can make assumptions or understandings about about the physical off of our personal experience, off of scientific experiments and stuff like that, and then
mhm.
look back and be like, oh wait, we got stuff wrong. Whereas rationalism is that if knowledge is based on the use of reason and logic, I can come to know truth without evidence for it in and of itself and just use reason and logic. So if we have these tools such as reason and logic, and I argue for a metaphysical being and it's logically consistent, I think we can get to know some understanding of truth and certainty partially through that idea.
Okay, so like if I'm not mistaken, and I don't mean to upset
Mhm.
like the philosophical fanboys that are listening, like so you're arguing, I guess maybe from like a Kantian perspective, because like it's kind of off topic, but like it reminds me of like deontology, like the
I don't know enough
priests.
about Kant
Okay.
to I don't know enough about Kant to fulfill that idea. But if Kant is arguing for some form of rationalism, which is what I'm heading for, um, sure. But I think Kant probably wouldn't because Kant I know is like against the idea of God. I don't know if he's he is the central he synthesized early modern rationalism and empiricism. So yeah, he probably merged these ideas together. I'm arguing to keep them
Oh, separate.
separate in some way aspect or yeah, aspect.
Oh,
I
okay.
think rationalism in and of its own self through logic and reason we can come to know truth.
Okay, okay, yeah. Then I think like, oh shit, I don't know too much about Kant either, admittedly, but I think like okay, then maybe I am sort of like taking his perspective because at least like I would say like I think our empiricism, at least even on a practical level, we use empiricism and rationalism to like connect like together, and this like makes sense on like our day to day life. So it's like um. I think yeah, I still have the same struggle. I don't know if that mostly makes me like an empiricist then over a rationalist because at least like
You
that's
probably have
one
a
for the
merging of the
reason.
two because you're slightly more of an intellectual to some degree than most people, and I think they probably do have that merging. Whereas, like I said, like a rationalist would denounce, an empiricist probably would too. They would denounce aspects of like eyewitness testimony, and personal experience. Like anecdotal evidence, therefore, is a minor evidence.
Mm.
However, I do like the distinction would be is do you think we can only come, especially you as more of an absurdist, do you think we can only come to know truth through evidence, or do you think we can through logic and reason come to know truth?
Well, I guess okay, yeah, I have a hard time understanding this because I feel like I can't tackle one without getting into like the other. So maybe this is where we're gonna have a hard time with this like conversation because at least like yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
gonna hold to the whole like because like even you can agree that obviously yeah that we take things wrong about like the physical universe. So at least like the only issue that I have is that like yeah, you're not necessarily wrong to think that like okay, if you're just taking it purely from like a rationalist perspective that like maybe we can know logically that like there is something beyond like the the physical and like the like empirical like nature of like reality. But then again, I think like the only thing that concerns me a little bit about it, which is why yeah, I guess we're saying that like I both like kind of merge it, is that like how do you know you wouldn't ever be wrong? about that if you're not going to rely at all, because like if we're talking about the metaphysical aspect of things, we're not going to necessarily rely on like any sort of like physicality. How do you know you'll never be mistaken? Like I guess it's just like what I'm curious about. That doesn't even
Yeah,
necessarily mean that you're
logic
wrong, but
and
it's like,
I
yeah.
think logic and reason therefore are a consistent constant. At least
No,
that's what I would assert. Logic and reason are a consistent constant, right? So like, um, rational thought, therefore, or rationalism,
mhm.
um, being dependent on things that cannot change, such as logic. So it's really interesting. In the Christian worldview, what I would argue for is, you know how Christians would say that God doesn't emote the same way we do because the way we emote implies change. I don't know if you've ever heard that before,
I
but
mean,
this is going
yeah,
to give me
that
a point.
it is an interesting concept. Yeah, like well, like how would it be
So
different for
yeah,
you?
so we would say that I the ancient words, and I still don't know why the authors use these, but Augustine, and I've even read not Augustine's works himself, so I haven't read, but I've read quotes and quotations, and even modern scholars talk about it. But they would say God has I believe what's called affections and not passions. And so the distinction would be something like passions. I think is how we emote. I could be mixing these up, but we
Mhm,
emote in the way of like when like mood swings, right? Mood
mhm.
swings imply a change within the psyche or the character.
It's
Um,
sporadic. Yeah, it's sporadic. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas if God does that, that would mean God can change. It would mean that God has potentiality to change. And that can't go. That would go against his character. Um, so because God can't change, I bring all this up to say, uh, I actually forgot why I brought it up because it was getting me to a point, and I totally am blanking on it. Oh, I was gonna say is like yeah. Um, I was gonna say that if God cannot change, that means his attributes therefore are not enacting at one moment. So God, we don't say that God can love because that would imply potentiality. God isn't capable of potentiality.
Oh, I guess
He
why
has
like
no
God
potential
is
for change.
love, God is good. Like
Yes,
it's those like clear
exactly. We would
definitions.
say God is because these are attributes of him that are unchanging. And so one of these attributes that we would say is God is logical.
Ooh,
So if God is
yeah,
logical and God is logic, meaning he's the author or ordainer of logic, that would be a consistent. And this is almost presuppositionalism, but this is also like
yeah,
a
yeah. I was
person who
about to say,
doesn't
yeah.
believe in God, right? Like a rationalist who doesn't believe in God could still argue this basis that logic is a constant. We couldn't get it. We may get our perception of logic wrong at some shape or form, but the logic itself, right, wouldn't be wrong. It would be a consistent constant.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Because like you're trying to argue
so when
I'm
when you
guessing from like an axiomatic point of view. Like it's supposed to be self-evident, so you don't question it. Well, not that
not
you don't.
necessarily self-evident so you don't question it, but more in the idea that like you if you
Like no
uh
different than if I were to say like the because like obviously I would be a naturalist more so than you by default. It's like if I were to say, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it would be your equivalent of like me saying that like the naturalist world is made of natural things. Like it's just like you know.
yeah, to some degree, yeah, it's just self-evident in and of itself partially. Whereas logic I would say is also self-evident of itself. It's the like a natural world ever being a non-natural world is oxymoronic, right? It can't happen. And I would say logic ever being illogical can't happen. Um,
Mhm. But
People using
so God
logic to be
God didn't
illogical can
create
happen,
logic.
but
God didn't create logic. You would say He is logic. Like He is the
logic,
foundation
yeah,
of
yeah.
logic.
I would say he is, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not logic is not a created thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Is
And
that
but I guess like yeah, I guess it's like where it gets tricky for me is because you accept that as an axiom and I don't. I'm just like I could ask you questions like, but I imagine like it would be redundant for you just because we like work on like different axioms. It's like, oh, you're not omniscient, so how do you know that another being such as God can be omniscient? You're just assuming he's omniscient, but to you, because it's axiomatic, it would kind of be a pointless question, I guess, inevitably, and that would be where our impasse is, I guess.
Yeah, probably.
Hmm.
Sorry. I'm uh doing like six things at once. But yeah, no, you're right. That's probably where I'd fault would be.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you, not to change topics, but I do think we're hitting a wall here. So I
Mhm.
wanted to move to another topic that you and I were talking about the other day, which is the psyche conversation that we were having with our other friends. I want to bring this up though because I think it'll get us to a pivotal point of like um, distinguishing naturalism and materialism
Mhm.
from some sort of other like deep emotional mean or maybe even spiritual or in some constance or way.
Mhm.
Because I think once again, if we can foundate this idea within you and me, that we grant some of these aspects that are beyond stimuli, uh, then we can, might get closer to the concept of a god or a deity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, because like I don't want to cut you off.
Unless
You
you
want to
want to,
talk first,
unless you
but
want to stick on the
I have my
kalam.
thoughts. What's my what?
I said unless you want to stick on the kalam, I'm cool with either. But I think these are. You're right. We're hitting a wall, and so I'm like, what is the best way to either tear down or go around it?
I mean, I think y- I wouldn't mind talking about the self just because like we're connecting it back towards like the metaphysical, and I guess like in the sense even the kalam it is entering like metaphysical territory just because like you said that like God does not appeal to like our rules in our universe. So it's like I don't mind tapping into that self because like I when we had that conversation, I even thought personally, I guess like better ways that I thought like I could like explain to you, but like unless you want to like go first with that.
No, you got it.
Oh yeah, because I remember. And yeah, this is not to like scramble and like go all over the place because I remember I was asking you about like, okay, then like what about free will? But then you said that like it doesn't really matter whether it's like premeditated or not because like I guess from like your understanding it's still you. And I understood like let's say in like MBTI terms, I even thought that like, okay, this is clearly where like our differences like clash because I'm an FE user and you're an FI user. And like the more I thought about it, and I guess like it would I would be curious to like get your reaction on this because I don't really see the things that we do as something that's like part of ourselves. So like kind of like what I said in like MBTI lingo, I'm more FE than FI because for example, I even had a conversation with like somebody else and we were talking about values and they brought up a good point to me. So I logged it into myself. For example, it's like somebody can be passionate about photography. And let's say they're
Mhm.
like an FI user and they're really into like taking pictures and stuff like that. But if this person were to have been born at a time where cameras weren't invented yet, there's no way they would ever have a passion for photography and like taking pictures. So from my FE point of view, you can only have values to which that the material naturalist world allows you to. So it's technically never personal. How do you feel about that?
Ooh, that's so weird that that's how you view it. Because no,
Weird
because
or
I'm the
like
other way
weird?
around. I think I would say that makes it more personal.
Really? Or like yeah, like how does that work? Like it's
Like if I'm born in a time where it's like you cannot have certain interests unless it's contingent upon the time that you exist within. You to you individually, your interests will always be, um, uh, yeah, they may be contingent on outside things like the time, but like they are also, uh, this is gonna sound weird, but maybe centered within the self, right? So like let's say I'm a person who, let's say I'm this person you're talking about, right? And I just get born at the beginning of like the time that digital cameras are becoming accessible to everybody.
mhm.
Um, I couldn't have that forever ago. But now that I can, it
Mhm.
becomes even more personal to me. I get to curate something with it in my own passions. Even if the idea that my access to this thing is contingent upon the time, the way I engage with it is solely contingent upon me.
Okay, see, yeah, now I
I'm
understand why you said
personalizing
it
that.
was. Now I understand why you said that, like, what I said was just, like, weird to you, because, like, admittedly, when you said that, I thought that was
That's
weird.
weird to
Because
you.
yeah, I would not, I would not naturally, like, think that way, like, as well, because it's like, yeah, I guess, yeah, it is
Interesting.
a clash
What are
between,
you?
like,
You're what? INTP or ENTP?
INTP, INTP.
INTP. Okay, and I'm an
And
ENFP. So yeah, interesting.
yeah, and to be fair, like yeah, like because I'm an INTP, my FI is like all the way at the bottom. It's like yeah, like
Mhm.
8 slots. So I think like yeah, like it might be super difficult, but at least like yeah, because like the way I see it, I'm like, I kind of see, maybe you don't see it this way, or maybe you do, but like maybe not to like a greater extent that like I do as an FE user. I don't know. Let me see like your reaction on this as well. I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds more or less probably the same as like what I already said about like cameras and stuff like that. But I think like, because when I think of like values, I think of it as like groups and like where you belong. Like, for example, let's say religiously, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, whatever, or like political views, conservative, liberal, this or that. Like, when you select a certain thing that like you're passionate about, it's almost like indirectly you are uniting yourself like with a group. Like we're Christians, we support God. We're Muslims, we support Allah. We're conservatives, we don't want the banning of guns, like quote unquote, and like like all these kind of things. So it's like I kind of see values as not something personal, but it's like a filtration towards these are my people, quote unquote, like as best as I could say it, I guess.
Um,
Which I'm not saying that like you as an FI user like can't do that because like obviously like if a bunch of FI users are in a room and they like the same thing, I'm sure it doesn't denounce the FI that like all you guys have. I just don't. I guess like I have a hard time fathoming like how you still know it's personal to you. I guess rather than like this is the right side
probably
to
just
be
based
on
off the engagement.
engagement.
I'd say that's the only thing. Like the way that like when I talk to a great example would be like me and Christians, right? If
Mm.
I'm kicking on my Christians, yeah, we're gonna stand for the same principles in business, but like the way we framework our relationship with God, quote unquote, is always going to be personalized to ourselves and to our things. I was just talking with my dad about this today, and he was like, me and him both view the biblical understanding of a man and his job differently, and the way he should engage with his work. Uh, and that becomes very personalized. It's like one person may have this calling from God to stay where they're at in this job that they're not necessarily fully satisfied in, but because God has it on their heart, they'll do it. And then another person like me might be like, I'm just going to use that job as a means to get to what I really, really want because I think God has a better calling for me. And
Mhm.
so like that personalized idea within that, even in like if I meet a bunch of other musicians, right? I talked to a guy on the phone today. One of
Mhm.
shout out Julian himself. I talked to one of his medium coaches or like I guess intermediate level coaches, and I was supposed to talk to a head coach, but I took a nap and slept through it. Um, but even that guy, I was talking to him, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm a musician. He started off in a metal band, and I play in a metal band, but now he does like R&B and produces and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Oh, I make hip hop that's very R&B oriented." And we both are definitely very similar in our interest and our ways that we engage. But at the same time, I'm like, I can already feel, even in a phone conversation, the distinction of how we approach these things. That's what makes it personalized and authentic.
Shit. See, yeah, I think like that's super interesting because like I could probably think that way. Maybe. I mean, FI is like still like my like last thing, but like I would have to like work super hard. But like yeah, I'm like I'm still not predisposed to think that way, which I guess is like yeah, like that's what makes it like different because like even when you say those things, you know, like I'm not gonna lie to you. Well, I'm sure you already like interpreted it if you like know me like well enough. Like I've heard so many Christians say that. Like even if it's for different things, like I guess like akin to like oh God has a plan for you. So like maybe yeah, kind of like with someone specific that you're talking about, maybe it's this job or maybe it's this. I'm like, yeah, sure. Those are different things, whatever it may be. But I feel like the root explanation is still the same thing because God has a plan
Of
for
course,
you or something like that. So it's just like
yeah.
it. I mean like, which
But
is
it's
kind of funny
personalized
because
because
like
he
it's
cares about
so.
the person, is what I would say. Maybe that's just my advice being because maybe an FE Christian wouldn't view it the same way. But like it's still personalized to you because God cares about the person. This is like why I'm on the self help stuff right now, is because I think I'm doing God a disservice by not loving myself. And it's not to trauma dump or whatever on your freaking thing, but I say this thing
No,
because it
no, you
makes a
can say
point.
whatever you want.
Yeah, yeah. I'm doing God a disservice by not loving myself because Romans 5:8, while we were sinners, He died for us. He saw the entirety or fullness of me as we're dying for. He cares about the individual and the person. So what's personal to you and personalized to you, and how He engages with that and how He curates that in some way, shape, or form is like, yeah, that's to me that's real. Um, and so, like, to hear your view of like, yeah, it's all contingent upon God. I'm like, you're right, but it's personalized. God personalizing things. That's very, very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess yeah, I don't know. I would have to think about like FI more or even like honestly even like a lot of the things that like we covered because like you got me like wanting to check out more I guess like empiricism, rationalism. How are we gonna
Look into Aquinas. I would start with the basics. Like if you can find, there's a YouTube channel I recommend it. I recommend it for everybody watching this.
Mhm.
This YouTube channel called the Thomistic Institute, and they argue from a framework of Aristotelian metaphysics and biblical theology that I think is challenging, informative, and good. Um, and will maybe put you in a different boat or space. I think you and I have hit a wall in this conversation that we may have to stop it and come back to it as another point, which
Yeah,
I'd love
it's
to
yeah.
do.
Yeah, it's a good I think like this was good to like I guess like get a feel for things and it's like super funny because like I was thinking we were just gonna talk about like the kalam admittedly, but it kind of just like I guess like you know like bounced to like
I knew
oh
it was gonna snowball. Because like well there's a lot to it. The idea of
Mm,
cause or causation, the idea of how a being
mhm,
itself can exist without being caused, the idea of how an infinite regression
mhm,
can't exist if everything that begins must begin with a cause. Then we
mhm.
would just say the infinite progression never began, and if it never began, how did we have a chain of causes, right? If it
Yeah,
infinitely
and I feel like
regresses,
yeah,
like
we never.
that's
Mhm.
these are clashing ideas and ideals. So
Yeah, and we never really covered mereological nihilism as much as I'd like, but it's like I think like
I'm
we
gonna
we
read
kind of.
up on that if you want to do. We can do another episode where we like only talk about mereological nihilism and
Mhm.
Aristotelian metaphysics. I'll do.
Oh,
I'll watch
sure,
like a
sure.
few videos on them and see what I can get to.
But I think like yeah, like this would be a good time to stop unless you had like more things to say.
Nah, bro, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on, everyone. Thank you for listening. Sorry if I rambled because I do that. If it was word salad, I apologize.
I mean, I'm pretty okay. If they're on this channel, they're used to it from me, so I don't think they should complain, bro.
Fair enough.
All right, all right. Well, goodbye, everybody.
Later's people. Bye.